Roughly 600 people have been killed in southern Syria this week, in clashes between factions belonging to the Druze minority on one side and Bedouin tribes and Syrian regime forces on the other. The violence has mostly been situated around the predominantly Druze city of Sweida. The city came under attack by Bedouin tribes as well as Syrian regime forces, and reports have emerged of heinous sectarian atrocities committed by forces affiliated to the Syrian regime against the Druze minority. Bedouin tribes have also claimed that Druze factions have committed similar human rights abuses against them. The clashes prompted Israeli airstrikes against the Syrian regime, who have vowed to protect the Druze minority and have warned the Syrian government against sending forces down south near the Israeli border. But what is this violence really all about? There's always some geopolitical machinations going on underneath the surface, and to dive into that, we first need to understand the context in which Syria finds itself in, as well as the intentions of both the government of Ahmed al-Sharaa in Damascus, as well as Israel. And first, the context. Syria is the most important piece in the entire Levant. And when I say Levant, I refer to the current geographical area in the eastern Mediterranean that includes present-day Syria, Jordan, Palestine, and Lebanon. It's also referred to by other names such as Greater Syria, or an Arabic term that was used by US Special Envoy Tom Barak just last week, Bilad al-Sham. Now, after World War I, Britain and France divided that Greater Syria into the four countries that we have today: Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine. But the French wanted to go even further than that. It wanted to break down the current territory of Syria into various mini-states that reflected the various religious and ethnic demographic makeup of that present-day Syria. Now, those French designs included an Alawite state on the coast just north of Lebanon, as well as a Druze state in the south around the city of Sweida, where the clashes are currently occurring. And the reason why the French want to divide Syria up like that is because it's a classic divide and rule strategy. The more divided your opponents are, the more divided the people are that you want to subjugate and rule over, the harder it is for them to come together and resist your colonial rule. And those intentions weren't lost on the locals, and ironically, the force that was responsible for pushing back against the French were the Druze in the south under Sultan al-Atrash. Sultan led a great Syrian revolt against the French that ensured that Syria remained united and rejected French designs to split the country up into tiny ethno-sectarian states. So the territory of the Syrian Arab Republic held. But what happens after 50 years of a dictatorship, which is what we've had under the Assad regime, which fell at the end of last year? You get a power vacuum, and that's what we have in Syria today. And the map of Syria today largely resembles those French designs 100 years ago. It's really split up. You've got the Kurdish areas in the northeast that are under American protection. You've got the Alawites on the coast who don't like being under the new Syrian regime in Damascus. And you also have the Druze in the south who don't like being under this regime and are agitating for more autonomy. And this comes to Israel's intentions. Israel's overall intentions has always been to weaken the states around them that might challenge their supreme position in the region, as well as provide support for the Palestinians in resisting colonization. And if you look at what's happened since the State of Israel was created in 1948, you'll see a trend in which both the Americans and the Israelis have gone after all the states in the region that have openly challenged their hegemony. The first main threat was Egypt under Gamal Abdel Nasser. They pacified Egypt with the 1978 Camp David Accords. Iraq and Libya also openly challenged the Americans and the Israelis in the region. And now both those states have been destroyed and fragmented. And the same has happened to Syria. And what all these four regimes had in common was that they all supported a variety of Palestinian groups against Israel. And so what Israel wants in Syria is not new. What Israel wants in Syria is what it's got in Iraq and what it's got in Libya. Countries that are completely fragmented, completely divided, state institutions completely hollowed out. So the country itself is totally incapable of resisting and challenging Israel militarily, economically, or politically. Because the greatest threat to Israel are not non-state actors like Hezbollah and Hamas. The greatest challenge to Israel are states that have the weight and power of a state, economic power, military power, that can challenge the Israelis. And we saw that with the Iranians, right? Iran was able to inflict significant damage against Israel, much more than what Hezbollah could ever do and much more than what Hamas could ever do. Iran is a state actor and has the ability to challenge and inflict damage on Israel. That's what Israel doesn't want. It doesn't want other states in the region who have the power to challenge them. So the Israelis in Syria are just playing the same colonial game that the French played 100 years ago of trying to pit different communities against each other in order to fragment Syria. Because if Syria are united under a single government in Damascus, with the people rallying behind it, poses a major challenge to Israel. And that's what they don't want. So Netanyahu and the various Israeli leaders are all calling out, oh, we were here to protect the Druze. They couldn't care less about the Druze. What they care about is using the Druze as a pawn to weaken and fragment and divide Syria. And Walid Jumblat, the Lebanese Druze leader, has caught on to this and is saying that openly. Israel doesn't care about you, the Druze of Sweida. It's only using you to weaken Syria. Because weakening Syria serves Israel. It doesn't serve Syria. It doesn't serve the Druze. It doesn't serve anyone except the Israelis. And this is a good segue now to talk about the intentions of the new Syrian regime under Ahmed Sharaa. Now, there are a lot of misgivings about this new president and his regime. This president has his roots in Al-Qaeda. He was the leader of Al-Qaeda in Syria, which was called Jabhat al-Nusra. They did a whole rebranding and called themselves Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and now they're ruling Syria. Now, supporters of the regime will say that Sharaa has disavowed his Al-Qaeda past and is a new man. And Sharaa indeed talks the talk about unity, about uniting Syria, bringing everyone together, having an inclusive process that all Syrians participate in the renewal and revival of a new Syria. He says all the right things. But as always with politicians, you never judge politicians just by his words. You have to look at their actions. And the actions of his regime suggest the complete opposite. If anything, his actions appear to add up to Sharaa simply wanting to consolidate and impose his rule across all of Syria and gain the international recognition for his rule in Syria. So let's judge him by his actions, and let's look at Shara's record so far. Extremist forces affiliated with his government have been carrying out atrocities, sectarian atrocities, against Syria's minorities, essentially since Sharaa came to power last November. Forces affiliated with the government carried out massacres against the Alawites in March, and according to a Reuters investigation, those abuses are still ongoing. His forces have also been harassing Christians, which culminated in the suicide bombing targeting that church in Damascus last month. And there have been repeated attacks by forces affiliated with the regime against the Druze minority, the most serious of which we've seen in the last week. And the videos coming out of these attacks by the fighters filming their own attacks are just showing the most horrendous and heinous sectarian violence inflicted upon these minorities. These fighters that are affiliated with the government are insulting Alawites, insulting Christians, insulting Druze, mocking their faith, mocking these minorities, mocking the way they dress, mocking the way they appear. It's important to emphasize this because we need to understand that the framing isn't just the government fighting rogue elements within a country. Those that make up the new government are inflicting violence against sectarian minorities because they see them as infidels, because of their warped extreme ideology that is rooted in Al-Qaeda. And so back to Shara's actions, what he's trying to do by targeting various minorities is to assert his control across the entire country and quell any potential opposition that may come from these communities, right? These communities that are understandably reluctant to live under an extreme regime that has its ideology rooted in Al-Qaeda and that considers them all to be infidels. But beyond targeting minorities, Sharaa has also been working to consolidate his rule in Damascus. He's appointed family members to key positions of power. He held a sham national dialogue that was criticized as being very brief and had notable figures absent. He developed a constitution that awarded himself significant executive powers. He's delayed holding the election, so currently he's a president with no popular mandate. The Syrians have not chosen him to be the president. He took the seat of power and has denied Syrians an opportunity to having an election for another 4 years. And on top of that, he's incorporated all those foreign extremists that fought with him in Al-Qaeda affiliated militias into his security forces. And that's all on the domestic front. On the international front, he's been running around trying to gain legitimacy for his rule from the US-Israeli Gulf Arab axis. And so far, two of those players, the US and the Gulf Arab states, have granted him that legitimacy. It's the Israelis who have been holding out. They've been having secret talks. Well, not so secret anymore. They've been having direct talks, and the Israelis haven't come to the party just yet. And you might recall earlier in this video, I said that Syria was one of the main players in the region that had always provided support for the Palestinian resistance. Well, in order to demonstrate some goodwill with the Israelis and the Americans, the Sharaa regime arrested key Palestinian figures in Syria, so leaders of Palestinian Islamic Jihad and leaders of PFLP, two Palestinian resistance factions that are currently fighting in Gaza. The Sharaa regime had their officials in Syria arrested a few months ago. And the deal the Sharaa regime has been proposing to the Israelis is that they will normalize with Israel and essentially surrender the Palestinians, as well as strategic parts of the Golan Heights, which are currently under Israeli occupation, and ceding that to Israel in order to win the approval of both the Israelis and the Americans for Shara's rule in Damascus. Now, I think Sharaa understands the state of play right now in the region, right? He understands that Syria is totally incapable of challenging anyone in the region. It's weak, it's broken, it's destroyed. He also understands that Israel is the main regional power, and it has the ability to get rid of him and his regime just like that. So I think that's obviously why he's trying to get a deal with the Israelis, as well as get on Trump's good side in order to insulate his rule in Syria. But I think for the Israelis, they've got two options here, right? Option one is making a deal with the Sharaa regime and potentially having a puppet Al-Qaeda-like dude in Syria, but a united Syria. Or it can seize on this rare opportunity to go into Syria, divide it up like the French wanted to do 100 years ago, create mini-states like Lebanon, and ensure Syria is weakened and fragmented indefinitely and won't be able to challenge it for at least another 100 years. But from the internal perspective, all the actions indicate from this regime that it's not interested in democracy, it's not interested in an inclusive process, it's not interested in uniting Syria. In fact, its actions have been geared towards tearing Syria apart and pitting various sectarian communities against each other. In other words, it's playing directly into Israel's hands. If Israel seeks a weak and fragmented Syria, and the Sharaa regime is playing that to a T. All of this looks very dark and gloomy. Is there an alternative for the Syrian people? There is an alternative, but it's a long process. We have to remember that 50 years of dictatorship suffocated all intellectual and free thought. There was no political culture in Syria. And so that regime has just been ousted. And there's a lot of wounds in Syria that need healing, as we can see. But for a new political culture to emerge, there needs to be peace, there needs to be calm, and there needs to be space. You need to have a society that's free of violence and also free of political intimidation and repression in order to have a free exchange of political thought and ideas that eventually culminate into a vision, different political parties that present their visions for what Syria could be. And from what we've seen so far from the Sharaa regime is that there's no indication that any of this is going to occur with this Al-Qaeda rooted regime in power. It's not going to be a regime that disavows violence. It's not going to be a regime that disavows repression of minorities. It's not going to be a regime that disavows repression of those who have different thoughts. Sharaa is looking to consolidate his rule in Syria, not with a popular mandate, but with force. If Syrians are wanting a future that doesn't look like its immediate past under the Assad regime, it needs to come up with alternatives to the Sharaa regime in Damascus. Thanks for watching this video, and I want to spark conversation in the comments by asking you all this question. What do you think needs to happen for Syria to get to a path where its sovereignty is respected and defended, and there is space within the country that allows for pluralism and that allows for the development of a new political culture where the free exchange of intellectual thought is respected? How do we get there? If that's the outcome, how do we get there? I would love to read your ideas. Please leave them in the comments. And also, please support independent media. Go to our Substack and subscribe. Cheers.